In 1970, American anthropologist Jean Briggs published her book, Never in Anger: Portrait of an Eskimo Family, the culmination of years of fieldwork with Inuit families on the Arctic coast of Canada. She described the extraordinary control Inuit had over their anger. Briggs observed that even just showing a smidgen of frustration or irritation was considered weak and childlike. When someone knocked over boiling tea, damaging the ice floor, nobody reacted. When a carefully braided fishing line snapped, nobody expressed frustration. Briggs told the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, "My ways were so much cruder, less considerate, and more impulsive. I was often impulsive in an antisocial sort of way. I would sulk, or I would snap, or I would do something that they never did." Later, Briggs began researching how Inuit developed this remarkable restraint. She observed that most Inuit parents never raised their voices at misbehaving children. Yelling, Briggs explained, was considered immature. Yelling at a small child was viewed as inappropriate, even ridiculous. It was degrading for an adult to lose self-control. I imagine that most of us find it hard to imagine moving through life in such a way. Most of us snap, we show contempt, we lash out, we storm away from conversations and even relationships. We lose our tempers at people we love, including small children. We do not tolerate insult, real or perceived. We act in ways we regret once we've cooled down. We don't know how to squelch our anger, even when we want to do better. Out of control anger is all over Parashat Ki Tisa, including from characters who ought to know better. As Reagan chanted for us so beautifully, the Israelites' boisterous idolatry before the golden calf enrages God. And God tells Moses, "Now let me be, that my anger may blaze forth against them and I may destroy them." Moses manages to talk God down from this absolute punishment, but smashes the tablets of the law and enlists Levites to go on a rampage for God. The Levites kill 3,000 people, and God sends a plague to kill even more. God tells Moses that now an angel will accompany the Israelites on their wanderings through the desert. They no longer merit the presence of God, God's self. I wonder how the Inuit would respond to this story. Certainly, the parasha has devastating theological implications. Is God truly so angry, so out of control? According to our sages, God does have an angry streak. God would prefer to be merciful, yet is sometimes overcome with anger, just like we humans are. And so, God prays for restraint. For those here in person, you will see a handout with a passage from the Babylonian Talmud, Berachot 7a. And for anybody unfamiliar, the Talmud is Judaism's core rabbinic text, a record of storytelling, debate, law, and philosophy from the 3rd to 7th centuries. And as Jews, when we read the Bible, we read it refracted through generations of commentaries, particularly those of the Talmud. According to Rav, a 3rd century sage, God prays these words, "Yehi ratzon milfanai, sheyichbeshu rachamai et ka'asi." May it be my will that my mercy overcome my anger. May my mercy prevail over my other attributes. May I conduct myself toward my children with the attribute of mercy, and may I enter before them beyond the letter of the law. It is an astonishing prayer. God doesn't pray for the obedience of humanity or for strength or the rebuilding of the temple. Rather, God prays for restraint over anger. God prays that divine mercy overcome divine fury. The Talmud goes on to relay the story of Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha. Yishmael ben Elisha had the title of high priest, but he lived about 2 generations after the destruction of the Second Temple. Yishmael recounts that on Yom Kippur he entered the Holy of Holies. And given the chronology, we imagine that this was in a vision or a dream. Yishmael offered incense and saw God seated upon a throne. God said to him, "Yishmael, Beni, my son, bless me." And there's such tenderness here. Beni, my son. God addressed Yishmael by name and relevant title. Not Kohen Gadol, high priest, but Beni, my son. And God asked for a blessing. And the words came to Yishmael. "May it be your will that your mercy overcome your anger. May your mercy prevail over your other attributes. May you act toward your children with the attribute of mercy, and may you enter before them beyond the letter of the law." Miraculously, Yishmael knew exactly the prayer that God needed, exactly the words that God's self prayed. Rabbi Amy Scheinerman writes that Yishmael provides a prayer that reinforces God's effort to achieve self-control over divine anger. And God nodded and accepted the blessing. The Talmud concludes, this story teaches us that you should not take the blessing of an ordinary person lightly. It was by virtue of his status as high priest that Yishmael had the opportunity to enter the temple's inner sanctum. Yet, God was more interested in Yishmael's status as Beni, child of God. When we stand before God, each of us is ordinary, and each of us is God's child. And parenthetically, my mother always taught, never turn down a blessing. And if somebody wants to bless you, no matter their faith tradition, you say thank you very much and you accept it, because they might be offering, either by luck or miracle, exactly the blessing that you need that day. The Talmud repeats God's prayer for restraint. It is uttered once by God and once by Yishmael on God's behalf. And likely this repetition is for emphasis. The story suggests we should not read every divine outburst in the Torah as God's intentional, reasonable, rational decision. God has a temper, as we humans do, and God works to overcome it, as we humans ought to do. There is much in this world to be angry about. I do not mean to preach tolerance of injustice or forgiveness of unaddressed injury. Black feminist, poet, and activist Audre Lorde argued that anger has a purpose, and we ought not be so sensitive or decorum-minded that we won't stomach the sometimes messy expressions of anger from someone who has been mistreated. Righteous anger can be the fuel someone needs to survive abuse. I have tried to learn my anger's usefulness to me as well as its limitations, Lorde said. Anger can spark moral clarity and can be transmuted into purpose. Jewish tradition does not expect us to accept insult without retort or suffer injury without restitution. Yet, our sacred texts demonstrate that emotional self-control is a Jewish value. If we enter conflict, we should do so deliberately and rationally. We should be driven by conviction and purpose, not uncontrolled emotion. God's prayer begins with the phrase, Yehi ratzon milfanai, may it be my will. God values restraint. The prerequisite to strengthen self-control is will. We are more than our amygdalas. We are B'Tselem Elohim, made in the divine image, and we, like God, can control our anger. May this be our will.